starting with you.
Vertically.
All goes on.
So before the sannyas initiation, why can't the sannyas danda be put in a vertical position?
It wasn't the position, it was that you can't put it on the ground. Or it shouldn't touch. It's a sacred thing, so it shouldn't touch the floor. If you put it on the floor, then you put asana under it, or cushion, or something like that, and then that's okay.
Thank you.
But it's not the position, really.
Also, in the spiritual world, everything is full of spontaneity, and at the same time they do everything perfectly without a mistake. And how is that possible?
But your definition of spontaneity is different than what we use, rag, or the spontaneity of Shastra. You're talking that, spontaneous, whatever comes to my mind, I just do. But that's not the spontaneity that when we talk about spontaneous devotion, it isn't that people just do whatever they want. It means that the motivation for doing very strict things, so sevasada karupena, siddha rupena chatri, so they follow strictly all the rules of sadhana. In the spiritual world, they also have their own different ways of serving Krishna, and they're very established. They're strict in one sense, but the motive is not out of any type of obligation, but it's spontaneously out of love. The reason they do those things is because they want to do them, not because they have to do them, not because they think that Krishna is God, not because there's some or even awe and reverence that inspires them, but purely because in Vaikuntha also there's love, and there's certain level of spontaneity, but it's always mixed with this awe and reverence that I have to do this because Krishna's divinity is inspiring me. So there it's not the divinity, it's just because they love the person, they like who he is, not what he is. So and that's important to understand what spontaneous means. Spontaneous doesn't just mean whatever comes to your mind. You just do. So there's there's Mother Jashoda oversees what devotees do. It isn't that someone just cooks whatever they want for Krishna. They have very strict recipes, things that they want, what does Krishna like, and she's overseeing them, making sure that those things happen. So, Krishna dresses in a certain way, he behaves in a certain way, he has certain likes because he's a person, so people have to adhere and adjust to those and satisfy those. It's not my likes, it's their likes. Out of love, Krishna will even accept that. So when someone offers him a flower or a banana peel in ecstasy instead of a banana, so Krishna will accept it, but that's just because the devotee was in ecstasy, he didn't know the difference between the two. It's not because he decides, well, I'm going to start feeding him banana peels from now on. Because he's God and he can eat it anyway. So that's not spontaneous. That's a different type of spontaneous. And then?
In a Srimad Bhagavatam purport of Srila Prabhupada, I read that Archa Vigraha form and the Virat Rupa are both material forms of Krishna. And what is the difference between them? Because of what we worship the Archa Vigraha form.
They're material in that they're manifest in material elements. The Virat Rupa, Shukadev Goswami also recommends that in first and second chapter for people to accept God's divinity, but they are not really ready to accept God's form, the deity. But they're willing to imagine, God as the sum total of all the material ingredients, and those material ingredients play different roles. Trees are the hairs on this universal body, and the rivers are his veins, and like that, the way it's described. So it's not really Krishna's body. Krishna doesn't have that body, therefore it's considered to be imaginary in one sense. Still, Krishna manifested for Arjuna and others. They want to see that form. But here it's Krishna being related to in terms of material elements. The same thing for deities. Radha Damodar is made of brass, Radhesham are made of marble, because we can't see Krishna's original spiritual form. But the form is the same. Avinatva Namanamino. And because there's no difference between the deity's form and Krishna's original form, therefore it's Krishna. Just like there's no difference between Krishna's name and Krishna. Or there's even, we're chanting Krishna's name. Actually, we're not chanting Krishna's name, we're chanting a shadow of Krishna's name. But still, by chanting that shadow of Krishna's name, we become purified. So what does shadow mean? It means it's manifest in terms of our concept of material sound. But Krishna's name is not material sound, it's transcendental sound vibration. So when we worship the deity form in material elements, as Krishna is not material, but the form is the same, and as you worship, you become purified, and you see that this is not a marble, but this is actually Krishna directly. So Krishna is manifest. Why? Because he's manifesting through the bhakti. So Jayatama Prapadyante. So same thing as the holy name. Why is Krishna going to manifest in the words that we say? He's going to manifest because of the devotion. According to the devotion, then the name, the mantra that we chant takes on more and more its original form. So as deity is worshipped more and more with increasing love and devotion, Krishna starts to manifest more and more his original form, and you stop thinking that you're worshipping a deity, but you're worshipping Krishna. You're serving Krishna. Okay, and you had one last question?
Yes. In the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it writes about Rishabhadev, and after he gave up his realm, he started to act like an insane person. But why did he do that?
Well, Maharaj Rishabhadev was king, aside from which he's also incarnation of Krishna. And so he renounced the world. And there are different ways of doing that. He could have just gone into the forest with his wife, which is sort of standard vanaprastha. He could have taken sannyas, which is another, what Lord Chaitanya did. But he took what is actually this avadhuta, which we read about, but we don't really see any particular rules and regulations. It's not a standard part of varnashram. It's sort of beyond varnashram, where a person, not just like sannyasi, he gives up connection with society, but still there's very strict rules of conduct. What they can do, what they can't do, how they should. In Bhagavatam, it's there. But with avadhutas, they become very spontaneous. Spontaneous now in the sense that they just do whatever they want. And generally, it's connected with being a very advanced stage of spiritual life. So there's the Python man, who's also an avadhuta. And he said, sometimes I eat, sometimes I don't eat. Sometimes a king invites me in a palace, I live in a palace. Sometimes I live outside. Also the avadhuta who talked about his gurus, his 21 gurus, 24 gurus, 28 gurus.
24, 28.
And again, so it's a sort of a conduct where one really doesn't care for any of the rules of society, but generally it's driven by very internal spiritual ecstasies. And since those ecstasies are really unpredictable, because ultimately it's avadhuta really means someone who's situated on the platform of prema. So Lord Nityananda, before he got married and then entered into the grihastha ashram, so he was avadhuta. So he was just wherever ecstasy, wherever prema takes him, then that's where he goes. So you see that somewhat in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's conduct, but because he was in the varnashram and he followed the sannyasa ashram, so he was very strict in that sense. But over and beyond that, when someone attains love of Godhead, then love of Godhead becomes the controller. You don't control it, it controls you. So whatever it makes you do, then you do. And when someone is willing to give themselves over that way to love God, that all right, whatever you do, I'll do, regardless of any social circumstance, then that's what that becomes the avadhuta stage that Maharaj Rishabdev entered. Lord Chaitanya, sometimes he lost control because he was driven by ecstasy, but often he would come back to external consciousness. Either he would see some of his superiors like Paramananda Puri and so on, and therefore he would come to external consciousness. He was, when he heard this Devi Dasi singing, and then he started running after her, but then when Govinda said, no, that's a woman, then immediately Lord Chaitanya stopped. Well, Lord Nityananda, he would just, go up to girls on the street and say, you're very pretty, would you like to marry me? And we just wander around town doing that because he was in a mood of ecstasy, he was in the mood of Balaram, and Vaishnavaya Kriya Mudra Vedkana, which a devotee who's attained the platform of prema, therefore you cannot question what he does because he's not necessarily conscious of his activities. He's being driven by another energy, and that's prema bhakti. Sort of makes the devotee dance, and you become a puppet. And Maharaj Rishabdev, in a certain type of, which we don't really hear much of, certain type of love of Godhead, like Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was in the ecstasy of Srimati Radharani for the most part. Maharaj Rishabdev, we don't know. Bhagavatam, I don't remember, it doesn't say very much. But he was also like that, form of the Lord, who was absorbed in this prema of some manifestation of love of God. But no connection with any external, either social rules, identity, or so on. So give up any type of Lord Chaitanya's followed and fell into the sannyas order and would always come back to that. So they don't have any social identity, and then they really do whatever prema wants, and that he just lay in his own stool and urine. Because they're so overcome with ecstasy, they didn't move. So if you stay in one place for a long time, but bodily functions, then you stay there. But his stool and urine was like very, very aromatic flowers that you could smell for miles and miles around. Hare Krishna.